everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather, and today I am going to review the Two Noble Kinsmen.
Non più tra I farfalloni amoroso, notte e giorno di torno girano, delle belle turbando al riposo, Narcisetto Adoncino d'amor. Delle belle turbando al riposo, Narcisetto Adoncino d'amor.
So, The Two Noble Kinsmen is a play by William Shakespeare, which was another collaboration with John Fletcher. If you watched my review of Henry VIII, that was another collaboration by those same two authors. This play, however, is very different from the history King Henry VIII. I honestly don't know where this play would fit. It's not entirely a comedy, it's not entirely a tragedy. I would probably put it in the romance category if we're allowed the romance category for Shakespeare's plays. Not only because it doesn't purely fit into one or the other of his categories, I'm using two categories because it certainly is not a history, but also because the way that it's written has this very fairy tale and otherworldly-like quality to it. Very much in the same way that The Tempest and The Winter's Tale do. First, let me fill you in on the plot, which I knew very little about before going into it as well. This play takes place in the court of Theseus and Hippolyta, but involves very different characters than A Midsummer Night's Dream when we last saw those two. This time they are joined by Hippolyta's sister Emilia, who is seemingly just living with them. During this time, a war has broken out, and widows of this war come to Theseus begging him to intervene so that the opposing force will allow them to mourn and bury their dead. This involves Theseus fighting a battle with the opposing force. He wins, and these women are allowed to mourn and bury their dead properly, which is wonderful. However, during this conflict, Theseus takes some of the conquering force's soldiers prisoner. This includes the titular Two Noble Kinsmen, the cousins Arcite or Arcite, I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce that, and Palamon. While they are both imprisoned, through their prison cell window, they see and hear Emilia walking in the garden with her maid, and they both fall in love with her. This, of course, causes extra conflict between the two of them, and they soon become locked in a deadly feud. In the meantime, the jailer's daughter has also fallen in love with Palamon, but he is not so interested in her. Meanwhile, another man entirely is trying to woo her, but she's not interested in him. All of this romantic chaos leads to a lot of infighting, trials of manhood by sport, and, strangely for ancient Greece, Morris dancing. Madness and love go hand in hand, and I can't even say anything about the way it ends, because that would be spoilers. So a few of my initial reactions were, firstly, that I'm going to call him Arcite and Palamon's relationship could have been really interesting. There are some really wonderful moments where the two of them describe brotherhood and their love for one another in such an incredible way. There have been debates as to whether there are homoerotic overtones to that speech. I think it's beautiful either way. My only problem with that relationship, then, is that the feud that develops between them over Emilia goes on for far too long. It overpowers that wonderful love that they have for one another. And honestly, if they truly loved one another that deeply, I don't know that they would have let the feud go on as long and as bitterly as they do. Secondly is the question of the jailer's daughter. who does not get a name, so that's as specific as I'm going to be able to be. She is also a fantastic character, or could be, but there's also something very unsettling about the way her character is dealt with. She is trapped in an unrequited love triangle between herself, her wooer, and Palamon, and she does everything to try and get Palamon to notice her. Huge, major things like helping him break out of prison, but it doesn't amount to anything. And her madness because of unrequited love is still quite tragic. Not in the same way that, say, Ophelia's unrequited love is tragic, but, and even that is a whole separate debate as to whether or not it's unrequited in the first place. But the way that it is treated is very unsettling. It's not really a resolution, that she is made a figure of fun and abused by everyone she comes in contact with after that point for one reason or another, either as entertainment or as property. And what I find fascinating is that even some of the characters, well, at least one, comment on this when a solution is suggested by a doctor. Either her wooer or her father, I don't remember which, says essentially, "Are you sure this is a good idea? I don't feel like this is a good idea." And I would absolutely agree with him, and I wonder how much that question is supposed to stick with us after you have finished reading it or seeing it. Another thing I noticed is that are the characters of Hippolyta and Emilia and their positions as strong women. Hippolyta, as we know, from Greek mythology, was an Amazon, meaning that she was incredibly strong physically as well as persuasively or mentally. So, since Emilia is her sister, it's fair to assume that she would also have that same strength, also being an Amazon. But in this play, we really only see their strength in their persuasive powers. But even then, only for a small bit of the play. Once Emilia realizes she is at the center of Arcite and Palamon's feud and is put in a position where she must choose between them, she is completely bereft of all her persuasive powers. She is stuck, she is frozen, she cannot move. Possibly because, again, she is also being treated as men's property by Arcite, Palamon, and indeed her brother-in-law Theseus. All around, there were some very unsettling romances. They were resolved in interesting ways that I did not expect, but that also left me with a lot to think about, for better or for worse. Since reading this play was not a great experience, quite honestly, I think we could have dispensed with the entirety of Act 1. I thought I would try watching it, as they were meant to be watched. So I watched a recorded production by the Globe Theatre from, I believe, 2018. And it was really interesting. They really leaned into the Old England roots of the play. Eliza Carthy, who is a wonderful traditional English musician, composed a lot of the music for this play. We were able to see the Morris dancing being performed, which I really liked. I don't know how traditional it is, not being familiar with Morris dancing technique. It didn't entirely match what I had ever seen in short travel documentaries, but this could also be an area of Morris dancing that I am not familiar with. I really don't know. But that music and that dancing really lightened the mood, which I think is why it was included to start with, because you need something to lighten the mood in the midst of all of these really difficult questions that the play poses. So that was a really fun aspect of the production. However, with all of these inclusions, it being set in Greece really doesn't make much sense. And I've been thinking about it a lot, and I have a couple of theories as to why you had this Old England and Greek crossover in this play. One theory is that Fletcher and Shakespeare just couldn't agree on where to set it, so we ended up with this odd mix of both settings. Or perhaps that setting it in Old England with far more pagan roots would have been just far too much for an Elizabethan or Jacobean audience who were deeply Christian. They were deeply rooted in Christian theology, given the feuds that had been going on for decades between Catholics and Protestants. So perhaps the suggestion of a pagan England would have been just too much for them to handle. So the authors had to veil their commentary in the setting of mythological ancient Greece. Will I ever have answers to any of my theories? I really don't know. I doubt it. But if you have a theory, let me know down below. I would also love to hear if you have read or seen this play, as I believe it is possibly the least often read and staged production. It's certainly down towards the bottom of the list. Or if you haven't seen it before, has this review made you more or less likely to look for it in the future? I always love hearing from you down below, but until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.